Our scripture today comes from the letter of James in the New Testament, from chapter 1, verses 19 through 25, and we hear these words for us this morning. You must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. But be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror, for they look at themselves and on going away immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. May we share a word of prayer together. Holy One, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our souls be pleasing and strengthening to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I've been trying to do a little bit of observing of our current culture and the environment that we're living in. And you may not have noticed this, but it seems to me that we're a little more polarized than we used to be. We're a little more vitriol to one another. And we seem like the separation's almost to a place where can we even bridge the divide between those that have opposite thoughts to one another? It becomes kind of a hard place to live in a society when you think of we're not separated by geography in terms of some people think this way, live in this geography, and people that think this way live in where you live. In neighborhoods, we're all this blend of theology and politics and differences of opinions, and the way we behave even on digital social media is not kind to one another. When I think of some of the initial meanings of digital social media was to connect with one another. When Facebook came on the scene, it was like you can connect with old high school mates and get connected to people you lost contact with, and somewhere along the way that still happens, but it's become a very different space to navigate differences of opinion. Places where people can just throw things out there and not worry about the repercussions of their thoughts. You could say something on social media, this is important to me, and then all this hate response comes back, and then they don't have to follow up to that response. They can just throw hate out there and let someone else deal with that on their own. So I got to thinking about the way our brains work when you have times of disconnect or times of separation of difference of opinions or how people function with one another. And I mean, maybe you like me, I think, I wish we lived in a better, more healthy way of navigating relationships, especially those that differ from our own. There is a psychiatrist by the name of Tracy Marks, and she had a really interesting article that was helpful to me. And there's lots of articles out there about how the brain works and what you do with things. But one of the interesting things she said in her article was, we have two different kinds of brains when we respond to something in the world. The first kind of brain is the reactive brain, and that is the brain that responds in immediate, when an alarm happens in our life, we quickly respond with quick response. It's the alarm quick response brain. And the other is the resilient brain, the part of ourselves that before we act, respond, and throw something back out there, we pause, step back, assess before we respond. So let me give you an example of a story in my life of the reactive brain, of how that works. My college roommate and I are at TCU. We're in the dorm together, and we're fast asleep in the middle of the night when the alarm goes off. And Rob, my roommate, goes, "Turn your alarm off." I said, "I'm trying. I'm pushing the button. I'm hitting snooze. I'm hitting the on-off button. It is not going off. He goes, turn it off. I said, I've done everything I know to turn it off. He goes, maybe it's the radio or the stereo. So I go over, get up, half-eyed, opened over to the stereo. The stereo's not on. It's not the stereo. He goes, what is it? I said, I don't know what it is. We're yelling at each other in the room because this alarm is going off. And I finally look out the window, and it's the dorm fire alarm that has gone off. I look out the window. Everybody in the dorm is already outside except Rob and I because we're yelling at each other about this noise in our room. We finally get out there, and they, where have you been? Had this been a real fire, y'all would have died in there. And that's how our responsive brain, the reactive brain just immediately has a reaction, and we're yelling and going at each other versus saying, maybe there's something else going on here I need to figure out before I just start yelling at the person in my room that's one of my best friends. And that's how that brain works. And then there's the resilient brain that steps back for just a second before I just respond. When someone responds to you and gives you some rhetoric that's mean or hateful that generates some kind of emotion, you want to give it right. They did it to me, I'm going to do it to them. That's that reactive brain working in that moment. The resilient brain says, before I speak, before I just jump back at that person, giving them what they gave me, I'm going to stop for just a second and see if there may be a different response I would give that might create a healthier dynamic in the conversation. So the resilient brain is kind of one that holds back just a little bit before speaking. I once had a mentor that says, when you react quickly, once you've said it, you can't take it back. You can be forgiven for it, you can work it through, but once it's said and out there, once it's there, you can't ever retrieve it and think, I'd never said that, right? Well, it's already been spoken. And so we have to get past that reactive brain, get to the resilient brain for us to function. And Tracy Marks comes up with one possible solution. This isn't the solution, this is a solution, one that she came up with. It's called PAUSE. And it's an acronym for 5 things that you can do when someone does something to you that boils up a response. She says, go through the PAUSE exercise. The P in PAUSE stands for pause and notice. Just kind of stop. Before you just have a guttural response back, pause. A in pause means acknowledge emotions. Name the emotions you feel. I feel angry, frustrated, disturbed, disappointed, whatever the feeling is. Name all the feelings, the emotions you feel in that moment. Get them out there. Say what they are within yourself. The U is understand the reactions. I'm angry, I want to respond this way. I'm disappointed, I want to respond this way. I'm frustrated, I want to respond this way. Know the possible responses that come up with that understanding phase. S in pause means select a response. That means there's more than one way to respond to this situation. Make a final determination and select what response you want. And the last in pause, E, stands for engage mindfully with the person you're engaging with, that you're talking with, that you're going to respond to with whatever they've said to you. Tracy will say this whole process of going through this pause exercise is what she would call a rewiring of the brain. Because our typical response is, they've done something to me, I'm going to do something to them. We need to step back and do something different. We have to retrain our brain not to be so reactive to situations that come up in our life. So I got to thinking about a recent museum I went to. Many of you know I went to Memphis for our General Assembly of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ back in the middle of July. And while I was at the assembly, I didn't get to see many sights in Memphis. I did get a little bit of Memphis barbecue. Pretty good. I'm not going to compare it to Kansas City barbecue. I might get in trouble there. But I didn't get to see any of the sights per se. And so the assembly ended Tuesday night. On Wednesday morning, I decided, several people had said, the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis is worth your time to go. So I decided to go to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. And if you know anything about that site where the museum is built around the Lorraine Hotel where MLK Jr. was assassinated. And so you walk up to the entrance of the museum, and to your right is the outside facade of that hotel, and they have a wreath hanging on the balcony of where he was standing when he was shot. And so you see that as you're making your way into the museum. You go through all the museum, and it goes through a history of civil rights from slavery all the way up to current times of how we have done poorly or done well with navigation of civil rights in our country. And the last place you go is you go into a hallway and you get to see through a plexiglass wall the room where MLK died. And you go up to the window and you can look out onto the balcony ledge where he was shot. One of the last things you see is where he was killed. And one of the things you learn is, he was imprisoned, he was in jail in Birmingham, letters from prison. He talked about that. And one of the things he discerned while he was in jail and thinking about his movement, he discerned there was two major responses to his movement at the time. The first movement, which was the largest response to his civil rights work, was called the fearful majority. Many people that did not want change to happen in our country. And they were fearful of what MLK Jr. and those that were following him and all those that had joined the civil rights movement, because it upset the normative behavior of, can't we just let things be how they are? We're living life and it's fine. Well, if you have power and privilege, it's fine. But for others, it was a horrific experience. But there was this fearful majority that change was coming, and they didn't want the change because they would have to give up something or let go of something or take away the life they had kind of earned or they felt they had earned at that juncture in their life. And so he felt like a large portion of the country was this fearful majority. But he also discerned while he was in jail that he encountered those that were for the movement, and with him, he had within that the frustrated minority, that his nonviolence approach was not going to work. There were some that were frustrated. They wanted action, and they would respond with violence, and that he was in the middle of the fearful majority and the frustrated minority, and he had to find an alternative way through that, and his path was this nonviolent response to continue showing up where you needed to show up and address the unjust systems where they were and name them as much as we could, but not doing so that would compromise what his beliefs were. He didn't want to respond with violence because it compromised his own sense of morals and values. Now, resilience, I talked about the resilient brain. Matt Bloom defines resilience as two things. It's how we respond to adversity and how we grow and learn through that adversity. So it's how we respond to it and how we grow and learn from it, that's what resilience is. Todd Bolsinger says it's that plus something else. It's how we respond to adversity, how we grow and learn through adversity, but he goes on to say it's how we stay in touch and don't compromise our values, our morals, and our faith at the same time. I don't want to be like them. I don't want to become what I despise in other people, is what he was saying. And so Martin Luther King Jr. had to find an alternative way. He had to have a resilient brain of, we've got a major dynamic going on in our country of race relations and equity and inclusion. If they're going to be violent, we're violent back. We're not going to get anywhere. There has to be some other kind of response to that violence and that hate and that injustice. There is a friend of mine, colleague and friend, and she was actually on staff here at St. Andrew for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, Allison Lanza. And one of the things that Allison has done in her life, being in ministry in different places, her most recent ministry over the last 5-6 years has been a ministry called Be the Neighbor, which is a group that coordinates mission trips for youth and intergenerational groups all over the country. And Kansas City is one of the sites, and we've hosted several of those sites over the last 3 years with Be the Neighbor. We have members of our church that have done justice presentations to Be the Neighbor groups. Well, every year, Allison has a theme for Be the Neighbor. And her theme I loved this year. Her theme was, let love be louder. Rather than responding with hate to hate, we can respond to hate with love. And let the love be louder than the hate is one of the ways she described it in her theme for the year. Now, we've done a little bit of this let love be louder thing at St. Andrew, not in kind of a formal way, but just by being who we are. If there is a call out for a demonstration on a street corner, an email will go out and 10 to 14 people might show up at a corner with signs and standing up against injustice in our community. Or if there is an offering for migrant farm worker children needing backpacks for the school year, and we put a goal of $2,000 out there to raise money for backpacks, and we blow out of the water and raise over $3,000 for those backpacks and beyond of things we can do, we are letting love be louder. I continually look at the landscape, and every day it's easy to get depressed and frustrated and like going, are we going deeper and deeper in the pit every day with things? We had more incidents in Lenexa and in Missouri this week of people being arrested in restaurants. We're continuing to see the onslaught of the care of immigrants in our country. We are seeing a kind of erosion of the public school systems, the eradication of books from libraries, the reduction of funds for teachers and the support of kids in our school systems. We're seeing record numbers of ongoing legislation that's targeting the transgender population in our country. We are seeing the elimination and this gerrymandering of voting districts around the country, in some states in particular, to silence out voices of people. I don't know about you, but sometimes some of the feelings that come up in my body around that stuff get angry and frustrated, get to the point of like, I want to do something. You know, you let that emotion kind of ride you. And there's nothing wrong with having the emotions, but we have to pour that emotion back into something constructive, not something that's hurtful. The last thing we want to do in a world that's hurting is add more hurt and harm to it. Now, this letter from James that I read, one of the things that's interesting about New Testament letters, which I love, is that usually not an initial letter. This letter that James, the author of James, is writing is usually not the first interaction with a community of faith. Oftentimes, it's a response to what that community of faith has already encountered. So I wonder, when I read some of this in chapter 1, let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. My guess is that community was doing the exact opposite of that. There was no listening. There was only a bunch of talking. And there was a lot of hate and frustration going on in that community. And the writer of this letter says, if there were visitors to that church, they would run and hide and go as far away from that community as possible. Last thing I want is a bunch of talkers, a bunch of angry people trying to do things. What they want is someone that can listen. And before you talk, pause and reflect on how you want to respond to conversations and interactions. And not let anger be what you're remembered for. Now, the interesting in this little section, it talks about hearers and doers. So it's not saying listen up and don't do anything. We're called to respond, but we're called to respond with a resilient brain and not a reactive brain to the situations that we're seeing in the world. A person that's a hearer only is a person that says, looks in the mirror and then forgets what they're supposed to do. But a person that's a doer recognizes there's pain, hardship, injustice in the world, is willing to do something about it, but doing so in a way that's constructive and healthy. When MLK Jr. said, I want this civil rights movement to be embedded in my faith, my morals, and my values, the one word that wrapped up most of everything he did was love. And not the love that was conditional, not the love that was only if, I'll love you but, I'll love you if. It was just, I will love you. An unconditional love. It was the basis for his idea that he got around the beloved community. What does it mean to be a community together, respecting and honoring each person even through the differences? There are times when I can maybe let the emotions get the best of me, or I can pause like Dr. Tracy says, and pause, account for, listen to, assess, make a decision, and then eventually engage. And by the time I've worked through my emotions, I'm not letting anger and disappointment and frustration disappear, but I've rechanneled it and allowing love to be as loud as possible in a world that is hungering for that very thing. The last thing the world needs is more hate, more violence, more engagement that separates people. We're already at the edge and the brink of how we engage one another. We need bridges, we need links, we need ways to connect one another, and I think only love can do that. It's about time for love to be louder. Love to be louder. May it be so.